Could the solution to the Mariners' third base problem simply be a bridge to making a run at one of the biggest names set to come out of Japan next winter? We'll answer that and more coming up here on Mailbag Monday. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Monday, October 21st, 2024. This is Tiding Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to be opening up the mailbag like we do here every Monday and answering some of your Mariners questions. We'll also be spinning the wheel for our top 5 Tuesday topics, so be sure to stick around for the end of the show for that. But before we get into everything, shout out to our title sponsor today, PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB, that's LOCKEDONMLB, to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. Sign up now to hear us create our 2025 Mariners off-season plans before we show them off here. All right, let's get into your questions. Ross wants to know, you both seem to be treating Haniger getting DFA'd as a given, which is certainly what should happen. What gives you the confidence, though, that ownership will allow that contract to be treated as a sunk cost? What are the ripple effects if they don't?
I would hope that ownership would let Jerry do his job, because I think Jerry believes the same thing, and he would make that decision. But because ownership is going to be involved, because there's money involved, I mean, I'm not super confident they will, but I think they should. So I'm going to operate under that assumption that they should do something that makes baseball sense. So that's why I'm operating under that assumption. Do I feel great that they're absolutely going to do it? No, because I think John Stanton will say, well, we're paying $17 million and he can be on the bench. So we're going to get some money back out of that. And you're not. Mitch Haniger's, I mean, frankly, on the field, he's worthless to you. Can't hit lefties, can't hit righties, or he can hit righties a little bit. Can't play defense, can't run the bases. He's just a 17 million.
Well at home this year, but that's about it.
Right. In a very small sample size where they were protecting his matchups and all that stuff. Like, he barely played in the last month. So I think that's a pretty good indicator of how the Mariners feel about him. He's just not one of those
overall,
guys.
you got negative value out of him. Mm-hmm. He was worth negative 0.6 F4. So no, it's not a slam dunk that you're going to get any sort of return on your investment here.
Right. And you can keep him on the bench at $17 million, or you could just eat the $17 million, spend $740,000 more to replace him and get somebody who can at least play defense, somebody who can at least, run the bases. So
moving on from him might be $17.5 million worth spent more than just keeping him on the roster.
Right. And like I said, Haniger is so, for lack of a better term, worthless on the field, that like replacing him with even somebody like a Cade Marlowe or a Dominic Canzone is actually better than having Haniger on your roster, even though those guys haven't proven that they're big leaguers, even, let alone good big leaguers, because at least they can run a little bit. They play better defense. They have a better shot to hit. So yeah, Haniger absolutely shouldn't be on this roster. And I think if it were up to just the baseball people, he wouldn't be. So I don't know how much Stanton is going to allow for that. Well, if he is on the roster, we'll hear Jerry like, no, we think, he's add something to the club, blah, blah, blah. He'll sell it. He'll try to sell it like he always does. But he's not going to convince me that if he was building this team the way he wanted it, Mitch Haniger would not be on this roster. So that's the assumption I'm going to make, that he won't be. But of course, there's a very large chance that he will be, because ownership doesn't want to eat $17 million because they don't believe in a sunk cost.
But it's already a sunk cost. And also, you should still view it as you saved money because you got out of the Robbie Ray contract a lot earlier.
Mm-hmm. Saved $30 some odd million.
Yeah. So you're still in a much better position, financially speaking, than you would be had you not made the deal in general. So just eat the money, move on, because he doesn't make any sense for this roster, right? The ripple effects, as you asked about, are that it creates a massive headache for you that you don't need. It's a completely unnecessary headache that would be completely self-imposed.
Right. And I mean, let's just be honest about it. At some point, Mitch Haniger is going to be off the Mariners roster. You carry him into the season and you do it in June. All you've done is you've wasted 100 plate appearances you've given him, and you've played a man down for essentially the first 2 months of the season, and you still have to pay him all that money. Like, you're not saving money. Like, you're giving Mitch Haniger his money, whether he's here or not. So just pay him to go away, essentially.
CJ wants to know, if you had to trade one starter, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, butts with 2 T's, who would it be for a 1-for-1 player swap, realistic for both teams?
Sure, I've got one. I don't think it's the answer that you're looking for, because I think you want us to be like Bryce Miller for Jarren Duran or whatever, or
Sure.
George Kirby for Royce Lewis. Like, no, it's Luis Castillo for Matt Olson.
Sure. I'll go with Logan Gilbert for Ketel Marte.
Yeah.
That's something we've talked about.
Yeah.
You trade a fringe Cy Young contender for a fringe MVP candidate, right? 3 years of Gilbert for 4 of Marte, who's older.
Yep.
But he's cost
More
controlled.
expensive for now.
Yeah, more expensive, but he's cost controlled. So you know
Right.
what's coming. And he's getting cheaper by the year, actually.
Mhm.
So it's $16.6 million this year and next.
Right.
And then $14.6 million in 2027 and $13 million on a club option in 2028.
Right. Whereas Logan's more of an ascending player, and Marte, just based on the age curve, is in theory a descending player, but is still very, very good.
Right. And the Diamondbacks, their offense is still pretty good, even without Ketel Marte. It's obviously nowhere near as good, but still pretty good. And pitching was such a massive issue for them this year. So that does make sense on both ends. Would both sides actually do that? Who knows? But that's an idea for you in the spirit of the question.
I don't think either side would do it, even though it's totally fine. But and Castillo and Olsen, they're making both roughly the same amount of money for the next 4 years. But Olsen does have one more year of club control than Castillo, but that's not necessarily a good thing when both of these guys are 30, 33 years old, like somewhere in that declining stage of their age curve typically. The money works fine. The Braves desperately need pitching. Their offense can more than withstand losing one of their bats. So Olsen didn't have a particularly great year, but neither did Castillo really. So I just think it makes sense.
Zach wants to know, first non-Hunter Cranton 2024 draft pick to get the call up. I think another one of the exciting reliever profiles, Brock Moore.
Yep. 100%. 98 to 101 with a fastball that has both ride and run on it. Pretty good wipeout sweeper, and a changeup that is pretty promising. Last I heard, it actually has a shot to be a legit third pitch. We'll see if the Mariners want to give up on the idea of him starting. There's command and control issues there. It's a very violent delivery, so there's some durability concerns about can he go 4, 5, 6 innings. So they just want to stick him in the bullpen to start next year. I could see him up. I mean, honestly, the stuff will probably be so good. We'll see him in spring training, and we'll be like, that's a major leaguer.
He's going to be 25 for most of next year. He's going to be a fast riser.
If he enters spring training as a reliever next year, he'll be up by July. He'll make his debut before July.
All right, we're going to answer more of your questions here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You could turn $10 into $1,000. Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB to get get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's promo code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It is Mailbag Monday. Be sure to stick around until the end of the show because we are going to be spinning the wheel for our top 5 Tuesday topics for tomorrow's show. But let's get back into your questions here. In the meantime, Darren McCacken Enjoyer wants to know, with the World Series coming up, who on the 40-man do you see stay on the 40-man? Who do you see being non-tendered, outrighted, DFA'd, etc.? Anyone in the farm that needs to be added to protect from the Rule 5? If so, do you protect them or not? Love the show. We love Ty and Colby. Not Darren McCacken. Ty and Colby. We've replaced Darren McCacken.
No, we're better at our job than he is at his.
So it would be easier to tell you who's not going to make the 40-man roster. Firstly, all the guys that finished the year on the 60-day IL, they're going to count towards the 40-man roster during the offseason. So Matt Brash, Jackson Kowar, Jimmy Garcia is a free agent, so he doesn't count. And then Sam Haggerty. Haggerty is ARB eligible, and I think we're pretty firm on. Yeah, he's going to get non-tendered.
Very well could be back on a minor league deal. I would almost expect it, to be honest, but he will be non-tendered.
Kowar we'll see because he's not ARB eligible, so they'll probably just keep him on the 40-man, at least for a little while.
Right. I mean, we should point out that the 40-man right now sits at 43 because of the 360-day guys, and then Garcia, who's a free agent, so he doesn't count.
And Turner's also a free agent, but that's it for free agents.
Right. Those are the only two. So, right there, you take away Garcia, you take away Turner, you're down to 41. You're not going to tender Haggerty, so that drops you to 40. So right there, you're compliant. But you're looking specifically for guys who could be DFA'd at some point this winter. The Mariners are still nowhere near a 40-man crunch. Yeah,
so Luis Arias is going to get non-tendered. Feel pretty confident about that at the $5 million that he's projected to make.
Yep.
I would think that 2 of the trio of Chargois, Thornton, and Voth are going to get non-tendered, and maybe they keep 1. Maybe they keep 2, because really those numbers that they're projected at are not egregious. But I do feel like that's an area where the Mariners go, we can do better or we can do about the same for about $1 million less, right?
Yeah.
Because they just did it. Right.
Saucedo and Spire also on the 40-man. Not guaranteed to get tendered. So
it's pretty similar situations, but also Saucedo's making $1 million. Spire's making $900K. Like that's hardly over the league minimum. Might as well just keep them around, at least for as far as insurance policies go.
See how they look in spring, and if Spire's out of options, I believe. If he just doesn't look right, just DFA him in the spring. No reason to do it this winter.
Yeah. And so after those guys, I mean, obviously Haniger, we'll see what they do with Haniger, we talked about earlier. And then there's like the fringe guys like Austin Kitchen.
Right. Obviously Polanco will fall off the 40-man too when they decline his option. So really there's going to be 3 free agents, and that takes care of your 60-day IL guys after you non-tender Haggerty. So you're already at 39, and like you said, Voth, Thornton, Chargois, pretty likely at least one of those guys, if not 2 of those guys, are non-tendered. So you're already at like 36, 37.
Yeah.
And then Rojas, we'll see. That's kind of the big question mark right now.
Yeah, Rojas. Yeah.
But like you said, Urias will be non-tendered, so you're down to 35 already. Kowar, we'll see. But, again, the Mariners are nowhere near a 40-man crunch. They're just not there yet, because you start looking at, like you said, Austin Kitchens. Easy, DFA him if you have to. Jonathan Diaz, Samad Taylor, Cade Marlowe, Cody Bolton, Carlos Vargas. There's like 8 guys that the Mariners could DFA if they had to make room. And that's not counting the probably 4 or 5 guys they're going to non-tender. And then the couple guys who have options, one of which is almost certainly not getting picked up, and one of which that is. So without even DFAing anybody, we're already at 7 free spots on the 40-man. So this isn't a concern.
And then as far as the Rule 5 eligible guys, there really aren't any. Taylor Dollard might be the most notable Rule 5 eligible guy, and he's thrown 8 innings in the last 2 years.
Nobody's drafting him. And if they do, who cares?
Right. And then maybe Jimmy Joyce.
Probably not, but maybe.
Yeah. And that's really it.
You have plenty of spots on the 40-man. So if you want to protect somebody like Jimmy Joyce, you can, because you can just DFA them later in the winter. But the 40-mans or the Rule 5 is not a thing this year for the Mariners. They don't have to worry about it.
No, next year is going to be a bit more interesting, potentially. Tyler wants to know, what's one transaction that would surprise fans the most, understanding what's possible financially? I mean, spending actual real dollars on someone would be pretty surprising.
Handing any hitter more than $16 million.
Yeah, that would be very surprising. Or actually finding a way to repurpose Haniger's money would be pretty surprising.
Yeah, I think if they signed Christian Walker, we'd all be like, whoa, didn't see that coming, even though it totally makes sense. I think if they sign Santander, if they sign Walker, if they do something like that, which yes, they can absolutely afford. Yes, they absolutely should do stuff like that. Do we think they're going to? No. So that would be surprising, but it's something very realistic that they should be able to accomplish if they really wanted to. Yeah. It's something like that. It's bringing in a good offensive player and spending good league above league average money to get that player. Because you know what, Mitch Garver, giving him 2 and 24, that's nothing. That doesn't count. That's not anywhere close. It's give Anthony Santander 4 and 80, and we can talk about the Mariners' commitment to strengthening the offense through free agency, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, pretty much spend money. I think the number they have to hit is pretty low. If they give any free agent hitter more than 3 years and more than 15 million AAV, I think that'd be pretty surprising to most of us.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we have a couple more of your questions to answer here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. Yeah, you heard that right. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It is Mailbag Monday. We got a couple more questions of yours to answer before we spin the wheel for our top 5 Tuesday topics. This question comes from Max, who wants to know, since the Rockies have reportedly said they are going to cut payroll, is there anyone on that roster you would trade for? The Rockies are cheeks, so nothing.
Right. The only guys that you would be interested in on the Rockies are the guys making the minimum.
Yeah.
Nolan Jones, who's terrible this year, so even that's a risk.
Yeah.
Tovar, who doesn't get on base, so there you go. And Brenton Doyle, who's not getting traded because he's making the minimum and he's really good. That's it.
Yeah. All right, Mariners to the Moon. This is our last question of the day. Mariners to the Moon wants to know, with the relative lack of depth at third base in the minors outside of Ben Williamson and or some of the shortstop prospects moving positions, do the Mariners try to find a long-term solution at third this winter, or do they settle for a stopgap and go hard after Murakami next year? I mean, I think it's pretty likely, given how the third base market looks, that you're going to end up with a stopgap type of player at third base, or a bridge type player, however you want to look at it. I don't think that bridge is necessarily towards Munetaka Murakami, who, by the way, for those who don't know, third baseman from Japan, who's going to be possibly the biggest name to come out of Japan next winter. That's depending on if Roki Sasaki makes his way over as well.
Sounding like it's trending that way. But yeah, we don't know. We also technically don't know if Murakami is coming over next winter yet. Although he will have served his time or whatever and blah, blah, blah. Like he'll be.
And I don't think Sasaki will have by then.
No, Sasaki would still be an international amateur free agent. Like he'd be treated under those guidelines. If he came over next year, I believe that Murakami would be a regular free, like a posted free agent, if I'm not mistaken.
That means that Murakami can make as much as he wants in free agency, which pretty much puts the Mariners out of contention.
More than although, again, John Sand did say we don't want to sign older players.
Sure.
And Murakami would come over at 26 years old.
Sure.
But pump the brakes a little bit on Murakami anyways. Dude strikes out a lot in Japan.
Sure.
Now he's going to come over here and the strikeout.
Japan pitching's pretty good though.
It is, but you're not seeing the same pitching in Japan that you are in Major League Baseball on a night-to-night basis.
Sure.
I mean, let's not compare the two leagues like they're remotely close in terms of talent. The top-end talent, probably.
I think the gap has closed a bit, but
it has. But again, we're talking about a guy who this last year struck out 180 times in 610 plate appearances.
Yeah, that's concerning.
Yeah. Now he draws a lot of walks, mainly because he's a big power hitter over there, and he tends to get pitched around. But he expands the zone. The strikeouts have been escalating quickly over the last few years. He went from 128 to 168 to 188. In the same time, his batting average went from 318 to 256 to 244. And his slugging went from 711, 500 to 472 in Japan. The home run total has 39, 56, 31, 33. This isn't a profile of a guy who's like, oh my God, you have to have him. And by the way, my understanding, not a very good defender at third base. Probably better suited for first base. So it's not a no-brainer. Like there are some red flags here, including like, can this dude, is this dude going to strike out 200 times? And if he is he going to hit at least 230? Is he going to walk as much as he does in Japan? If he's swinging and missing that much here in the big leagues, like, I don't know. So there's some legitimate red flags there. So I don't like the idea of like, oh, we have to save a seat for this guy we may or may not get. But I think, like Ty said, they may not have an option other than a stopgap third baseman. But I don't think it's necessarily for Murakami. I don't know if the Mariners are going to be all that interested in him based on the cost to acquire and the red flags in the profile. So, they probably are going to acquire a stopgap third baseman, but that's probably has more to do with the fact that there's nothing else really available this winter. At least it seems.
I think your next long-term third baseman is going to be Cole Emerson.
Yeah. Probably. If he's not your long-term shortstop.
And that timeline isn't going to start until mid-2026 at the earliest. Maybe start of 2026.
Into 2025, maybe.
Really?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
Right.
Wouldn't bet on it.
Right.
But if you're like, what's the earliest we could see Colt Emerson? July or August next year.
Sure.
When are you most likely to see him? Probably a year after that.
Yeah. So, I just, by the way, when I say stopgap option at third base or a bridge at third base this year, doesn't mean that guy is necessarily going to only be a Mariner for a year. It just might be, as we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, might be someone that probably shouldn't be playing third base who ends up playing third base for you this year. It's probably better suited to play first base or DH future years. So like Jake Berger, for example, maybe he plays third base for you this year, but after that, because you still have him for 3 more years after that, maybe he's your DH or he's your first baseman.
Poor starting pitching. Every ground ball to the left side. Hold on to your butts.
Yeah.
Somebody like Berger, maybe it's somebody who, first base or third, maybe it's a second baseman who plays third base this year and then moves back to second.
Yeah. Maybe it's Brendan Donovan, right? Brendan Donovan plays third for a year and then he goes over to second.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's Tommy Edman. Maybe it's Bo Bichette, blah, 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 blah. But it's probably, I would say the guy who's starting at third base on opening day this year almost certainly isn't starting at third base on opening day in 2026.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's fair. All right, it is time to spin the wheel for our top 5 Tuesday topics. Last week, Colby gave you his top 5 Mariners free agent targets, and I gave you my top 5 Mariners uniforms. So this week, I'm going to be tackling the more serious, quote unquote, Mariners topic, and then we'll see what Colby gets. But let's spin the wheel for mine. Lovely sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
Reasons for optimism.
You can't run from it.
Reasons for optimism. All right. I'll be optimistic. I mean, it's a good thing that I got this topic and not you.
Excuse me. I am Mr. Optimism.
I don't know about that.
I am very optimistic. So, I feel like this is a wasted opportunity, but whatever. The wheel is spoken.
Yeah. All right. Now it is time to spin the wheel for Colby's topic. We got a lot more options on this wheel for the non-Mariners silly wheel. I mean, there's some Mariners stuff on here, but if it's Mariners related, it's not very serious. Just say.
No whammies, no whammies. Stop.
The top 5 Mariners nicknames.
Awesome. List already done.
There we go. I can think of a few off the top of my head.
Number 1, the Bear.
All right, so there you go. We have our topics for tomorrow's episode. Be sure to tune in. But for now, that's going to do it for us. Before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Tiding Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Tiding Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.